Coast Guard and Maritime Transportation will come to order. I ask unanimous consent that the chairman be authorized to declare a recess at any time during today's hearing. Without objection, so ordered. I also ask unanimous consent that members not on the subcommittee be permitted to sit with the subcommittee at today's hearing and ask questions. Without objection, so ordered. As a reminder, if members insert a document into the record, please also email it to documentsti@mail.house.gov. I now recognize myself for the purposes of an opening statement for 5 minutes. Thank you, everyone, for joining the subcommittee today to discuss the Coast Guard's law enforcement missions. Specifically, we want to highlight the amazing work our Coast Guard members do to stop drugs and illegal aliens along our maritime border, and the service's efforts to limit illegal, unreported, and unregulated, or IUU fishing. To do that, I'd like to welcome our witnesses, Rear Admiral David Barata, Deputy Commandant for Operations Policy and Assistant Commandant for Intelligence for the United States Coast Guard, and Ms. Heather McLeod, Director of Justice and Homeland Security Programs for the Government Accountability Office. The Coast Guard is our premier maritime guardian. Every day, Coast Guard cutters, small boats, aircraft, and boarding teams are protecting Americans from threats. The Coast Guard leads America's efforts to control, secure, and defend the nation's maritime border, starting at the United States southern border, where President Trump declared a national emergency. Illicit maritime activity is a national security threat with impacts far beyond our shores. The Coast Guard is essential to preventing dangerous drugs from poisoning our communities, boatloads of migrants from landing on our shores or perishing at sea on unworthy makeshift vessels, and countering Chinese efforts to plunder our fish stocks. In November, Coast Guard cutter Stone broke a record, offloading over 49,000 pounds of illicit narcotics, seized in 15 interdictions, valued at more than $362 million. This marked the most cocaine seized by a single cutter in one patrol in Coast Guard history. At the same time, the Coast Guard is addressing increasing levels of maritime migration by protecting our shores and securing and defending 260 miles of the Rio Grande River. The Coast Guard's unparalleled expertise is essential to deter, interdict, and defeat threats to our communities. In 2020, the Coast Guard declared that IUU fishing replaced piracy as the leading global maritime security threat. IUU fishing robs nations of their fish stocks, their food, and it costs legal fishing operators tens of billions of dollars a year in revenue. China is the world's worst offender of this harm. The Chinese Communist Party provides billions of dollars in subsidies to its distant water fishing fleet, which plunders fishing stocks worldwide. Despite its best efforts, the Coast Guard's ability to interdict drugs, aliens, and IUU fishing has long been hindered by a lack of resources and personnel. Through the $25 billion generational investment that Congress authorized in the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, we have helped change the tide with new vessels and aircraft coming online, but there is more to be done. In light of this subcommittee's oversight role over the Coast Guard, I look forward to hearing from our witnesses about what the Coast Guard is doing well, where it can be better, and what it is doing to strengthen its capabilities. In that same respect, I also look forward to hearing the Government Accountability Office's evaluation of the Coast Guard's mission performance. I appreciate our witnesses both joining us here today, and I would now like to recognize Ranking Member Carbajal for an opening statement for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman McDowell. I'd like to yield to our ranking member, if it's okay, of our broader T&I committee, Mr. Larson.
Yeah. Thank you, Ranking Member Carbajal, and thank you, Chair McDowell, for calling this very timely hearing. Every day, the women and men of the Coast Guard coordinate and execute law enforcement operations to halt illicit activities, to protect lives, and to safeguard the interests of the U.S. Through partnerships with other federal agencies and with international allies and partners, COSIs interrupt and intercept individuals breaking U.S. and international laws. Coast Guard's been enforcing maritime laws for 250 years, and it shows. From drug and migrant interdiction to IUU fishing enforcement, nobody does it better. Recently, the Coast Guard has intercepted and seized several shadow fleet oil tankers in the Caribbean. By violating international law, these vessels and their operators become subject to search and seizure by the Coast Guard. This is a long-standing Coast Guard authority. To ensure a safely executed mission, Coast Guard personnel work closely with other agencies. And while recent operations have received public attention, and I'll have a few questions about it, it's not uncommon for the Coast Guard to exercise this authority in these venues. There are hundreds of dark fleet commercial vessels operating in violation of fishing laws, labor laws, and in some cases, trafficking people and narcotics. While the administration has chosen to target oil tankers, we can't forget these other serious maritime crimes. Illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing, otherwise known as IUU fishing, is when vessel operators violate national or international laws, regulations, or management schemes designed to ensure the sustainability of fish stocks. And most of these cases are found in areas like Oceania or Alaska and in and around the Aleutians. So we have certainly a direct interest in IUU fishing. Not only does this put a strain on fish stocks, but it also undermines hardworking fishers who abide by the law, including many of those folks in my district. The Coast Guard's role in addressing and preventing IUU fishing not only protects U.S. interests, it assists partners and allied nations. In fiscal years 23 and 24, the Coast Guard set its interdiction goal at 40% of the detected fishing vessels conducting IUU fishing within the U.S. Exclusive Economic Zone, or EEZ. Each of those years, the service interdicted 21% of detected vessels, with the majority detections and interdictions occurring at the time in the Gulf of Mexico. Over the same period, the Coast Guard boarded and inspected 274 fishing vessels on the high seas or within the EEZ of a foreign nation, resulting in 75 violations. So with more resources, I'm hopeful we can improve those numbers. Today, we're going to hear some good news stories about the Coast Guard enforcement activities, but as we discuss those successes, I do want to hear as well how the Coast Guard is ensuring that other core missions, like search and rescue, are not neglected. In closing, I'd be remiss if I did not talk about the sacrifice that comes with military service. Each service member has dedicated his or her life to protecting the country, and recent operations demonstrate the risk associated with that. And I look forward to hearing from our witnesses today on ways to improve the lives of COSIs serving at sea who are conducting these law enforcement missions, and how we can continue to support and improve the service. And with that, I yield back.
I'd now like to recognize Ranking Member Carbajal for an opening statement for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman McDowell, for you and Chairman Ezell calling today's hearing. The U.S. Coast Guard is the nation's premier multi-mission law enforcement agency. As the only uniformed service to conduct both homeland security and defense missions, the importance of the Coast Guard cannot be understated. One of the reasons why the Coast Guard is so successful is their unique status as both a branch of the military and a law enforcement agency. When the Coast Guard conducts counter-drug missions, they not only successfully stop, board, and search vessels suspected of trafficking illegal narcotics, but they also detain individuals who often provide critical intelligence on the drug trafficking organizations that put them on the vessels in the first place. The critical piece of the puzzle is only made possible by the precise and professional actions of our Coast Guard boarding teams. Upholding American constitutional values and international rule of law is exactly why the Coast Guard is so successful. Another unique aspect of the Coast Guard is its ability to enter bilateral and multinational agreements with other countries to help bolster law enforcement efforts for both the United States and its partners. This real-time engagement with other countries not only helps preserve rules-based order in the maritime domain, but it also helps the U.S. engage in strategic soft power diplomacy across the world. While the Coast Guard continues to put up record-breaking numbers of drugs seized and migrants rescued at sea, the numbers behind its budget have not increased at an equal rate. There's no doubt that we've seen an increased demand on Coast Guard law enforcement efforts, but we cannot forget the personnel who make these missions possible. I am very concerned that the Department of Homeland Security Appropriations Bill will not appropriately fund the Coast Guard operations and support account. Coast Guard assets don't run themselves. As GAO has noted, insufficient asset readiness coupled with workforce shortages hinder the Coast Guard's impact. We must address this issue. The Coast Guard's international collaboration is imperative. The Coast Guard is also a party to bilateral and multilateral agreements and conventions to protect natural resources and fish stocks from exploitation around the globe. Further, the Coast Guard works hand in hand with NOAA to protect and enforce our domestic fisheries, which is a multi-billion-dollar industry. This mission cannot be overlooked as well. Finally, while I have a serious concern about the administration's actions in Venezuela, I am encouraged by the Coast Guard's actions to enforce the law at sea. The Coast Guard's recent detention and seizure of dark fleet vessels operating outside of international laws highlights the risk inherent in a flag of convenience system. American flagged vessels are owned by Americans, crewed by American mariners, and follow American laws. We should be doing everything we can to encourage other countries to follow suit. I look forward to today's hearing and the opportunity to celebrate the accomplishments of the Coast Guard. I am proud to champion the service and dedicated Coasties who prove day in and day out that the Coast Guard is truly a global force for good. With that, I yield back, Mr. Chair.
Well, briefly, I'd like to take a moment to explain the lighting system to our witnesses. There are 3 lights in front of you. Green means go, yellow means you're running out of time, and red means please wrap it up. I ask unanimous consent that the witness's full statements be included in the record. Without objection, so ordered. I also ask unanimous consent that the record of today's hearing remain open until such time as our witnesses have provided answers to any questions that may be submitted to them in writing. Without objection, so ordered. I also ask unanimous consent that the record remain open for 15 days for any additional comments and information submitted by members or witnesses to be included in the record of today's hearing. Without objection, so ordered. As your written testimony has been made part of the record, the subcommittee asks that you please limit your oral remarks to 5 minutes. With that, Admiral Barada, you are recognized for 5 minutes for your testimony.
Good morning, Chairman McDowell, Ranking Member Larson, Ranking Member Carbajal, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today on the Coast Guard's law enforcement missions. As a military service, a federal law enforcement agency, and a member of the intelligence community, the Coast Guard represents a vital and unique instrument of national power. We control, secure, and defend our maritime borders and their approaches, facilitate commerce vital to economic prosperity and strategic mobility, and maintain readiness to respond to crises and contingencies that often arise with little or no warning. Transnational criminal organizations and designated terrorist organizations exploit the maritime environment to move deadly drugs towards the United States. In response, your Coast Guard is on the front lines and deployed around the world as a sentinel against those who would do us harm. Last year, our crews and our partners' tremendous collective efforts yielded historic results, removing more than 500,000 pounds of cocaine and denying criminal networks access to over $3.4 billion in revenue. This is more than double the amount we removed in 2024 and nearly triple that of 2023. We are also intensely focused on interdicting the precursor chemicals used to manufacture fentanyl, leveraging our broad authorities and effective partnerships to detect and interdict fentanyl and precursor materials before they can harm Americans. The Coast Guard also confronts persistent illegal migrant migration in the maritime environment. We employ cutters, aircraft, and advanced unmanned systems to control, secure, and defend our maritime borders. We face this threat on the Texas and Mexican border, along the Rio Grande Valley, the maritime approaches to California, and the southeastern United States and the Caribbean. Smuggling organizations and aliens use a variety of craft, from hopelessly overloaded vessels to high-speed boats and jet skis to crude, homemade rafts in their attempts. In response, the Coast Guard maintains a robust, forward-leaning posture to deter and interdict these voyages. In 2025, we interdicted or deterred over 11,700 individuals, a 120% increase over 2024. Along the Rio Grande, Operation Riverwall has already supported the apprehension or deterrence of over 230 individuals attempting to illegally cross since it commenced in August of last year. The Coast Guard also leads the world in combating illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing, or IUU fishing. This requires us to overcome an aging fleet and the sheer vastness of geography. but our efforts are crucial to stemming the growing threat that IUU fishing poses to the United States economy and global food security. Malign, state-supported actors exploit weak governance, undermine world markets, and create instability through a number of illicit activities. Maritime drug trafficking, illegal migration, and IUU fishing are all examples of this exploitation in the maritime domain. Similarly, dark fleet oil tankers subvert the rules-based order by operating substandard vessels with obscured nationality and ownership and false locations and documentation. These actions endanger seafarers and the environment and provide revenue streams to transnational criminal organizations. The Coast Guard directly confronts these evolving threats both near and far from U.S. shores, delivering an exceptional return on investment to the American people. Through the continued tremendous support of the Congress, especially this subcommittee, we are recapitalizing our aging fleet with more capable cutters, aircraft, boats, and autonomous systems, and transforming our talent management to build a larger, more capable workforce, as well as pursuing comprehensive modernization through force design to 2028. To sustain these efforts and to protect the nation's maritime interests, we will continue to work closely with the Congress to support increased and recurring funding for the service, including operations, assets, and personnel readiness. Thank you for the opportunity to speak on behalf of the Coast Guard men and women. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. Now to Ms. McLeod. You are recognized for 5 minutes for your testimony.
Chairman McDowell, Ranking Member Larson, Ranking Member Carbajal, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to be here today to discuss GAO's work examining Coast Guard law enforcement efforts. These efforts, including drug and migrant interdiction and prevention of illegal fishing, are vital to confronting illicit maritime activities. My testimony today will not be a surprise to anyone on this committee. GAO's work has identified persistent challenges Coast Guard faces related to vessel and aircraft availability, acquisitions, and staffing shortfalls that hinder the service's ability to meet its growing mission demands. We've made dozens of recommendations to the Coast Guard to help address these issues. Addressing our open recommendations pertaining to the Coast Guard's assets and workforce would help ensure that the service is efficiently using its resources to carry out its law enforcement missions. In 2025, the Coast Guard received nearly $25 billion for various acquisitions and in support of efforts to modernize operation and capabilities. This additional funding could help the Coast Guard address longstanding challenges that we've identified. Related to vessel and aircraft availability, the condition of the Coast Guard assets has been in a state of decline for decades. Our work has shown a concerning trend that the cost of maintaining these assets is increasing at the same time that their availability is decreasing. For example, in June, we reported that the availability of the cutters that the Coast Guard relies on for its law enforcement missions declined. We also reported that increasing maintenance challenges have led to cutters missing patrol obligations. We made 5 recommendations in that report to help address cutter challenges. These readiness challenges are not limited to its cutters. In April 2024, we reported that the Coast Guard's aircraft generally did not meet its availability target. Coast Guard officials attributed this to maintenance and repair challenges. We made 5 recommendations, including that the Coast Guard assess the type and number of helicopters needed to meet its mission demands. Our work has also noted that acquisition program delays have been a long-standing challenge for the service and continue to affect the availability of Coast Guard assets. For example, the Coast Guard's newest cutters, the Offshore Patrol Cutter and the Polar Security Cutter, are intended to support law enforcement missions like drug interdiction and prevention of illegal fishing. But we found that combined, these 2 programs are billions of dollars over their initial cost estimates and years behind schedule. We've made dozens of recommendations on how Coast Guard can better manage acquisition programs for new vessels and aircraft. The final challenge I'd like to highlight is Coast Guard staffing shortfall and poor workforce planning. In recent years, the Coast Guard has raised concerns that its mission workload has outpaced its workforce levels. Staffing gaps, particularly in specialized units like tactical law enforcement teams, can hinder drug interdiction and other law enforcement missions. While the service recruited more enlisted service members than it lost in 2024, that had not been the case in prior years. In April 2025, we reported that even with the increase in recruiting, the service remained short of its enlisted workforce target. As a result, Coast Guard was operating below the workforce level it deemed necessary to meet its operational demands at that time. We made 3 recommendations to help address these challenges, including that the Coast Guard develop a clear plan to support its retention initiatives. In conclusion, while the Coast Guard plays a vital role in confronting and mitigating illicit maritime activities, it faces significant challenges in carrying out these missions. Addressing our recommendations in these areas will help ensure that Coast Guard is effectively and efficiently using resources to carry out these critical missions and protect our maritime borders. This completes my prepared statement, and I'm pleased to respond to any questions you may have.
Thank you. I'd now like to begin questioning, and I'll recognize myself for questions for 5 minutes. I want to thank you again for being here with us today, and just want to give a very heartfelt thank you to the members of the Coast Guard, and especially to the Stone. It's incredible work, and our country thanks you for that. But the Coast Guard recognizes illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing as the leading global maritime security threat. And it's no coincidence that the largest perpetrator of this illicit activity is China, whose many violations include fishing in other nations' exclusive economic zones and incorrectly reporting fishing activity. Can you, Admiral Barada, can you characterize the economic harm that these violations, or to either of you, can you characterize what this IUU fishing, how it harms the United States, and explain what steps are being taken to prioritize that threat?
Chairman, good morning. Good morning again. So IUU is a threat to both the global economy and the U.S. economy. The illegal catch that is brought in to the United States devalues the work that our domestic LMR, living marine resources, the fish stocks that we sell to our own folks, and impacts over $150 billion that our fishermen bring to the global domestic product. So, from our standpoint, it's a very difficult issue to deal with. As we look at the number of fleets that are out there, the distant water fleets, there's about 6,000 that we know are registered with China, and almost 17,000 that we think are registered in other flags that are conducting this type of work. The difficulty is that, as we get into some of these island nations where those EEZs exist that are not the U.S. EEZ, many of these island nations do not have the ability, they don't have the expertise, they don't have the capabilities, the small boats. And so the work that we do through multilateral agreements to carry shipwrights aboard our vessels, to sell them equipment to do it themselves, to enforce on their behalf, as we're out there under these treaties, gives them the opportunity to help enforce in their own exclusive economic zones.
Just curious, what species are they targeting the most to harvest?
It's actually a full range of species. About 10% of the stocks that we bring in, the seafood that we bring into the U.S., we estimate to be from as part of this trade ourselves.
Wow.
But it's obfuscated, as they land it in different countries. They do transshipments on motherships, and so it's very hard to track where the fish are actually coming from.
Gotcha. The One Big Beautiful Bill, as I mentioned earlier, included an investment of nearly $25 billion in the Coast Guard for new cutters, helicopters, modernized shore infrastructure, maritime surveillance systems, and much more. What benefit will these additional resources bring to the Coast Guard's law enforcement efforts, and how quickly will we see these benefits realized?
Chairman, It is a generational, maybe a historic change for the Coast Guard to get this type of windfall in the big beautiful bill. It's assets, the things that Ms. McLeod talked about. It allows us to recapitalize, across our cutter fleet. It allows us to add to our ice-breaking fleet, which also where the fish stocks are going as well. Technology, autonomous systems, it allows us to build out Cape May and maybe a new training center to bring more Coast Guard people, which for us is the lifeblood of everything that we do. So thank you very much for the support of this subcommittee. We can't thank you enough. It is much needed, and we will put that money to good use. I will tell you, the Coast Guard is 100% focused on obligating those funds in a timely manner and putting those assets in place.
Ms. McLeod, to you, the offshore patrol cutter is one of the service's highest acquisition priorities. When delivered, this new class of ships will play an important role for the Coast Guard's law enforcement efforts. Can you discuss very quickly the importance of this program and your assessment of its progress?
Yeah, the Coast Guard has identified this as one of its most important programs. The progress has been slow, challenging, and underwhelming at times. They continue to struggle with this acquisition, and I think taking the lessons learned from this acquisition could be applied to future funds, including those authorized in the Big Beautiful Bill that you mentioned.
Well, thank you. My time has expired. I'd now like to recognize Ranking Member Larson for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to start with Admiral Barada. And I don't need a lot of detail, but I think it's important for us to understand authorities under which Coast Guard is boarding these oil tankers. If you could just briefly discuss the right to visit boarding, but that only gives you the legal authority to board. But what's the authority under which you're acting in order to board? I think that's important to understand as well.
Ranking Member, briefly, we are using customary international law first and foremost to conduct the right of visit boardings. And once aboard, if we can establish that the vessel is without nationality, we can either get flag state consent, or we can, in the cases that they're without nationality, we can determine that they are under U.S. jurisdiction. And so that is kind of our opening point to use Title 14, sir.
Sure. Yeah, Title 14. But on that point, to establish the nationality, is it like pulling them over because of a broken tail light, and then you check on nationality, or is that established first by the State Department in an interagency process, and then you target that particular tanker?
So for us on the high seas, we do this very routinely on almost every vessel that's out there, multiple countries, multiple vessels. It's just under the law of the sea. It's customary for us to engage either right of approach or a right of visit and just determine what the vessel status is, what the nationality is, what their intentions are. In these cases, we've gotten some indication that their nationality is not accurate by either a database that we have, intelligence background that we have, working with the Department of State and working with their own flag states. We're seeing that there's a lot of these tankers that are just using false flags without notifying the flag state.
Yeah, and not to get in detail because you probably can't hear. Maybe we can talk to you all later in a different setting. But there's a use of Coast Guard and other intelligence assets to maybe narrow the focus a little bit, so it's not every tanker; it's specific tankers.
Yes, and obviously we're cued by the fact that these tankers are operating in Venezuela. And every vessel should be operating in its automatic identification system, and every vessel should be flagged so that we can tell these things. And yes, we work through our intelligence and other open source means to just determine that there's some anomalous information that's being provided. And so that does kind of trigger us.
I just want to establish that because you kind of do the same thing if you're doing drug interdiction or migrant interdiction.
Absolutely, yes, Ranking Member.
Same process.
Same process.
This focus is on these tankers.
Yes, absolutely.
I don't want to simplify it too much. I'm sure there's nuance, but
yes, sir.
Yeah, thanks. Mr. Clyde, I want to shift a little bit. So, yeah, we provided the Coast Guard $25 billion over the next 10 years through the reconciliation bill. And we, Coast Guard exceeded recruitment goals last year, I think, as well. So there's platforms, there's people, but over the last couple of years, the Coast Guard has retrenched a little bit in terms of sites, in terms of, because of recruitment, because of the lack of people, to move people away from current Coast Guard sites and assets from them. Is there a plan now that we're going to build additional replacement and additional platforms and recruit more people? As a Coast Guard, have you looked at whether the Coast Guard has a plan now to move back to places that they have retrenched from over the last couple of years? We got to put these people somewhere and these platforms somewhere.
Yeah, we've certainly examined, the funding related to the bill, as well as Force Design 2028. It's ambitious for the Coast Guard to be able to achieve those goals. We haven't seen from the Coast Guard yet specific plans on how it will execute that funding or achieve those recruitment goals. Certainly, they've made efforts in expanding their recruitment efforts through the different offices and different technologies, which is encouraging, but we haven't seen them measure the results of those efforts yet. That remains an open recommendation from us, and so we'll wait and see what happens there. Yeah.
Admiral brought it back to you the same question. You got the dollars for the platforms, you've got, and we'll watch, and we will definitely be watching that. You're recruiting, but under Admiral Fagan, those were all great goals and you're achieving them as well, but she also had to take actions because of the lack of recruitment previously to shrink the footprint a little bit of the Coast Guard. What's a plan to put people and platforms back to those places?
So as part of Force Design 2028, I think as Ms. McLeod mentioned, it is ambitious, but we're excited about it. We've reorganized the Coast Guard in several ways, which includes a group to focus just on people, which includes recruiting. And as you hinted at, over the last few years, we had been short, almost 9,000 people short on the enlisted side. And so the first thing we need to do is get those folks into the service and then expand by another 15,000. And so those are part of our goals to crew those ships, to return those stations where we had to take some of those operators and place them elsewhere for our most demanding needs. But we have a plan in place. We're happy to come and talk to the subcommittee about what that plan looks like, sir.
That'd be great. Thank you very much.
Chairman now recognizes Mr. Webster for 5 minutes.
Thank the witnesses for being here today and your testimony. Really appreciate that. Thank you, Chairman. Appreciate that too. Rear Admiral Perrotta, the Coast Guard began to ramp up the deployment of unmanned aircraft systems, and I guess it was for a cost-effective approach to provide a persistent airborne surveillance capabilities across the national security cutter fleet, and has validated a mission need for land-based UAS to significantly enhance ocean surveillance in support of the service's operations. How is the Coast Guard currently utilizing drones as a kind of a force multiplier for the agency's law enforcement missions? And how do we hope to see them in the future, use them in the future? How do they use to progress what's already started?
Congressman, good morning. Good to see you as always, sir. So the Big Beautiful Bill gives us quite a bit of funding for all types of autonomous systems, which we kind of break down into long range, mid range, and short range. Some of the short range drones we have found to be great force multipliers at a lot of our local patrol boats and our shore-based units to do any number of things, especially, for instance, where we don't have an air station or we don't have a helicopter or an aircraft available to us to help with search and rescue in some cases, to help with pollution response. When I was the district commander down in the Heartland District, we had a wellhead that had let loose and it was spilling oil and we worked with NOAA to put drones in the air to kind of reposition the boom, as the oil was spilling and it was progressing into the marsh to protect sensitive areas. So if you think about just a local unit, arriving in a government vehicle and not having the ability after, for instance, on the Mississippi River, where a number of barges maybe have crashed and sunk, to kind of put a drone in the air and take a look and see, what the expanse of that is, what the damage looks like to the bridge and other things. Those are the type of things that, if we put this technology in the hands of some of our innovative young people who are really excited about this, we have a program where we actually, we qualify folks from the unit. And so many of these units these kids are volunteering. There's 8 or 10 kids at a time who are, I say kids, these are petty officers who are 27. They're much younger than me. So, but they're taking the ball and running with it. And we're pretty excited about that capability.
So they're in the air and they can see and you can see and what's going on. Is there more to it than that? Is there more than just reconnaissance by them, or is there some other use?
No, Congressman. We're using it to inform our operations, and so for us, awareness informs the operational commander and allows us to deploy assets, change tactics, reach out to agencies in some cases, or even call assets off if we can determine that, hey. For instance, we get a lot of false reports about things, hey, maybe there's a kayak floating out in the middle of the bay. Instead of launching a helicopter, we might be able to launch something like a drone, look and see that it's something that's just a piece of flotsam that's not really has somebody on it, and kind of discount that as a SAR case.
So how would the development of a robust UAS program allow the Coast Guard to better accomplish its mission, multi-part mission, actually?
Congressman, it's going to reap us untold benefits. I think we've talked about the far reaches of the Pacific. We've talked about vessels trying to track those things. We are using our autonomous systems in any number of ways. One of our programs called Coastal Sentinel, which is going to be an array of radars and ISR systems. It's going to have, unmanned waterborne systems, air systems. That's going to allow us to have, pervasive maritime domain awareness and understand the threats that are on the border, conduct search and rescue, sea pollution spills, all of these things. And so, for us, that is the future, and what we want to do is allow those systems to do some of the work where we might not need a human being, and free up the Coast Guard experts to do just what only they can do. That's our goal.
Director GAO report, it concludes that while there's kind of intended to be a short duration, the Coast Guard has sort of surged operations to counter maritime migration and surges for 3 years. To do this, they've reallocated vessels and aircraft, personnel. What's the long-term solution?
Please answer quickly. And,
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I didn't mean to say Mr. Proud. Rear Admiral Moretta. Yes,
go ahead and answer.
Okay. I think if I heard you properly, you were talking about the surges and the Coast Guard efforts related to that. I think each of the Coast Guard efforts in times of surge, whether it's a migrant surge or a response to drug flow, just recognizing that there are trade-offs among these missions, and as the Coast Guard turns its efforts to one, something is happening in the other area, and being able to understand the impact of those efforts on the other missions is an important effort for the Coast Guard. Thank you.
Thank you. Now recognize the ranking member of the subcommittee, Mr. Carbajal, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Admiral Barada, prior to the invasion of Venezuela, we saw confirmed reports that U.S. military forces carried out strikes on vessels in the Caribbean and Eastern Pacific that the Department of Defense said were involved in drug trafficking. Given that maritime drug interdiction and law enforcement are a core mission of the United States Coast Guard, can you explain to this committee how the Coast Guard and the Department of Defense coordinated on these actions, especially in terms of legal authorities and ensuring compliance with international and United States law, or not?
Ranking member, in regards to the kinetic strikes on the drug smuggling vessels down there, I'd have to refer that to the Department of War. The Coast Guard was not part of those actions at all.
Thank you. Admiral Barada, we have received reports that the Coast Guard has experienced a degradation in information sharing from traditionally reliable international partners. How important are our allies in the success of drug interdiction in the long run?
They are vital to our success. And I think many people in the subcommittee, members of the subcommittee, are familiar with JIATF South, the work that's done out of Key West, the Joint Interagency Task Force down there, led by the military and coordinated. 60% of the work that's done in JIATF is assisted by partners, whether that's bilateral agreements, joint boardings, or assisted boardings. You know, for us, the Coast Guard Title 14 is the key for a lot of this drug enforcement that takes place as a potential violation of U.S. law. And so, you know, as Ms. McLeod has highlighted, you know, sometimes we do not have the cutters in place to do that, but we can do some of these boardings with a tactical law enforcement team. And so we get a lot of assistance from our partners in doing this type of work.
Thank you. I've had the opportunity to visit the JIATF South and have witnessed firsthand all the work that is being done down there. Ms. McLeod, your statement mentions 20 open recommendations since 2023 pertaining to maritime law enforcement operations. Which recommendations are the most urgent to improving the Coast Guard's ability to interdict drugs, interdict migrants, and thwart illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing?
All of our recommendations are important, and I'll just note that the Coast Guard has agreed with the vast majority of recommendations that we have been making in these areas. I think a couple of areas that it comes down to, and I'll highlight just one, is data and information. So the Coast Guard needs better data to be able to make these decisions about mission trade-offs. And by having such information, it could improve their performance, as you mentioned, where the cutters are, where the people are, doing these workforce analyses to understand the priorities amongst its limited workforce, and could assist in the surge operations when they do come.
Thank you. I know that's like asking a parent, pick your favorite child. Admiral Barada, would vessel safety, economic security, and national security improve if the flags of convenience system were abolished?
Ranking member, I think it's a difficult question. Like in the cases of the vessels that we're dealing with right now, these dark vessels, there's a difference between, say, an open registry and a false flag. In these cases, what we have found is 4 of the 5 vessels just were under a false flag. They had either were not registered at all, or they had not notified the country that they claimed to be flagged under that they were there. And so when we worked through the Maritime Operational Threat Response process, when we went back to the Department of State, they reached back to that country and just, you know, tried to validate the status. The country was completely unaware that they had, or the country had no registry that was open to other vessels. So I think what we're seeing here in this case of these there's about 300 at least that are mainly tankers that are operating in this dark shadow fleet. I don't think that would get after that problem. I think you know, there are some ways to get after that issue, but if the vessels are not going to be held accountable, then the registry itself won't, because we are upholding, for us, for instance, the Coast Guard does a lot of work as a port state. We validate these vessels are inspected, that they have their documentation and these things. The vessels that we're going aboard right now have nothing. They have all false documents, sir.
Thank you. I'm out of time, so I'm just going to read my last question to the record, if you could answer it later. Admiral Barada, it's been reported that the Coast Guard is hiring vessel inspectors to assess and repair seized tankers. We know that the service is already short 150 vessel inspectors, which has meant a less than ideal vessel inspection schedule for small passenger vessels. If you could, for the record later, submit an answer to how will the shortage, coupled with the new priority of inspecting seized tankers, affect the frequency of inspections of small passenger vessels? If you could answer that later, that'd be great. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I yield back.
I now recognize the chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, Representative Mast, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. Appreciate it. Ambassador, thank you for being here. Thank you for being here, ma'am. I want to stick with the ghost ships and maybe extend a little bit of the conversation that we were just having, understand a little bit more of the risk profile about these ghost ships that are legally moving Iranian oil. So just number one, when we talk about that risk profile, compare, contrast it to a traditional ship that you might board, check out their certifications, things like that, in terms of spill probability, hull integrity, crew competency, things like that. Give me a brief compare and contrast to something that's a legal operating vessel.
Well, again, we haven't seen many of these. These vessels we're seeing right now are probably the first couple that we've gotten aboard, but I will tell you, they are very...
And again, first couple you've gotten aboard?
Yes.
Is that what you said? Yeah.
Yes. We typically, the shadow fleet operates between China, Iran, Russia, Venezuela, Cuba. We don't access them. The Coast Guard the U.S. Coast Guard doesn't normally see them because they're not allowed to enter U.S. ports. But the one in particular that we boarded, the skipper, was extremely substandard. It was extremely overloaded. The cargo systems were not functioning properly.
How overloaded, how substandard?
Extremely, yeah, very substandard. They had loaded cargo into areas where they're not normally allowed to load cargo. They pressed those up, but the cargo systems themselves were not working. The firefighting system was not operating properly. Just basic firefighting, life-saving issues.
It's fair to say these are not the newest, latest, and greatest?
No, these are old. These are old ships. The value on these tankers is the cargo. The vessels themselves are not in good shape.
Okay, tell me about insurance carried on these. If they're moving oil and one of these ghost fleet vessels goes out there and has a spill versus something that is otherwise a normal operating vessel.
As we've gotten aboard, all the documentation has been false. And so, everything that we would normally require on a tanker to even operate in the United States, insurance, P&I Club, COFR, all of those things, we presume that they don't have it. And so we are treating it as if they don't.
So you're saying these ghost fleet vessels, maybe they carry fraudulent documents, but they're nothing more than fraudulent in your experience? Is that?
What we've seen so far is that all the documents they've had are not in compliance with international standards.
Now, my understanding is, and please correct me or educate me on this, it might be, we might label it for our purposes, an Iranian ghost fleet vessel, but that doesn't mean this is an Iranian flagged ship. Where are these? What's the difference between where they're flagged and where their actual beneficial ownership is? Where do you find that coming into play?
What we have found is that they are making multiple claims of ownership, multiple claims of flag state. So we do.
Where are those claims of ownership typically?
And it's been varied. The flags that they've been claiming have been in West African countries that don't have the ability to validate those things on the international level. Those type of things. The owners themselves are obscured to us. The vessels that have been seized by the Department of Justice. I'd have to refer you to those if they have access to the owners.
Distinguish between these terms, if you can. Again, help educate me on this. A vessel's registered owner versus the beneficial owner versus the operator versus the charterer. Walk me through those different terms and why they matter.
I'd have to get back to you on that, sir. We normally, in the Coast Guard, deal with the owner-operator, the primary representative of the vessel when we're taking official action. The nuance of some of those, I can get back to you on, sir.
So would you categorize this as certainly an environmental issue that these ghost ships are operating, an environmental issue for the Gulf?
Well, we are working to mitigate it. I think, the amount of cargo that's aboard some of the vessels, these are 1,000-foot, very large crude carriers, VLCCs as we call them, that are too large to enter into U.S. port. And so what we're doing is we're putting our marine inspectors aboard in order to mitigate that. We're working, to put salvage experts aboard. We have tugs aboard. We have folks trying to work to fix the equipment aboard.
So to summarize it, and if I missed something, let me know. But you said crews typically have a level of incompetence or untrained or just don't have the experience on these ghost fleets. That's fair to say.
The crews themselves, I wouldn't want to categorize, how they've been operating the vessels. I would say the vessels themselves are substandard. We have not evaluated the crews.
Okay. Thank you for your time. My time has expired. Thank you for
Thanks,
the
Carter.
answers, and all the best. Semper Paratus.
Gentleman yields. Ms. Strickland? Ms. Strickland?
Oh, he's back. Thank you, Chairman Ezell and Ranking Member Carbajal for holding this hearing. I first want to focus on force laydown and the Coast Guard's commitment to maintaining capabilities in the Indo-Pacific. A December 2025 Coast Guard report confirms that the Hawaii home-ported cutter Harriet Lane, which has been central to conducting maritime law enforcement and expanding maritime domain awareness in the Indo-Pacific, will likely be relocated due to home port limitations. Rear Admiral Barada, can the Coast Guard commit to ensuring that critical Coast Guard assets remain in the Pacific?
Congresswoman, good morning. So the Harriet Lane obviously is, they are located out there, been doing tremendous work. We've been very happy with them, and we're trying to push as many cutters as we can into the Indo-Pacific. And so we're still working on that. The Harriet Lane will not leave the Pacific. That we guarantee that. We're just looking for a place that suits the operations and the families that can accommodate her.
Great, thank you. And we must maintain a credible U.S. posture in the Indo-Pacific to deter CCP coercion and honor our commitments to those nations. I'm going to pivot a bit now, and I want to talk about the bigger picture of the Department of Homeland Security's actions. The Coast Guard operates under the jurisdiction of DHS. First of all, the American people deserve to feel safe wherever they are, at home, in their neighborhoods, and the work that you do is integral to that. This administration was voted in on the promise that it would deliver safety for all Americans. DHS broke that promise the moment they started marching into American cities and turning their guns on innocent citizens under the pretense of protecting communities. When people want to be part of the Coast Guard, there are strict recruiting standards. You have to pass a background check. You have to be qualified. The training is extensive. From what we're seeing with the latest recruiting efforts, that's not the case with ICE agents. At every turn, they are choosing the most reckless response possible and then refusing to be held accountable for it. They took no accountability when a SWAT team dropped down from a Black Hawk and stormed Chicago in an apartment building raid that led to no criminal charges. No accountability when agents shot 2 people during a traffic stop in Portland. And no accountability whatsoever when a masked ICE agent shot a 37-year-old woman in Minneapolis in the face. No accountability when the administration then stonewalled state and local law enforcement trying to conduct a fair fact-finding investigation. Americans, regardless of political affiliation, Democrats, independents, and Republicans are outraged at this administration's complete overreach and assault on the rights of the American people. But this was never about immigration for them. This is domestic terrorism. American lives have become an afterthought to this administration's ultimate goal of scaring people, declaring martial law, and using ICE as the president's personal police force. They're going around Congress, they're disrespecting the rule of law, they are disrespecting our role as a check and balance, and the American people deserve so much better. I yield back, Mr. Chair.
Gentlelady yields. Mr. Beggars, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My questions are going to be directed to Rear Admiral Barada. How often are you seeing foreign vessels operate in ways designed to avoid enforcement against IUU, and how are they doing this?
Congressman, quite often. It's kind of ubiquitous. They're doing it in a number of ways to kind of obfuscate where they're at. They don't identify themselves, or we found that the technology to kind of project your location is very pervasive in other spots. In some cases, they're clumping in together. In other cases, what they do is they'll take illegal catch to a mothership, and they'll put it into a transshipment so that we don't know which vessel was loading it and those things. And so, in a lot of ways, and then they're landing it in countries that are friendly to them, that need the money or need the catch, and so they'll bring it in there. But those are we see it all the time.
What would you say is the single biggest enforcement gap that you face in stopping illegal fishing in U.S. waters or near U.S. interests?
In U.S. waters, I think, and it's the same problem I think that we have in the rest of the world, is that you need to know where they're at. You need awareness of where those things are. And so, in the far reaches of the Pacific, some of the things that we're going to need some satellite assistance in order to compare the location of those vessels against their actual location. And then we're going to need data and artificial intelligence to kind of help us suss out which vessels are operating illegally.
When you're trying to measure whether you've been successful at inhibiting IUU activities, what are the metrics that you use to capture that? Is it boarding, seizures, disruption? How do you sort of characterize that?
We look at it in a couple different ways. Metrics are hard, but I think it depends on the fishing fleet. For instance, in the Gulf of America, where we're doing the Lanchero boardings down there near the Mexican border, and we've had luck, prosecuting some of those operators under the Lacey Act just in the last year alone. We're measuring the deterrent effect there, and what we have seen is that prosecuting and having some of these mariners plead guilty has had a deterrent effect. In other locations out in the Pacific, the number of boardings we do, can we spring upon them? Can we kind of shoo them out of other countries' EEZs? Those are better metrics for us and those bigger fleets and the far reaches.
Now, as you may know, I'm from the state of Alaska. We have more coastline than the rest of the United States combined in Alaska. A difficult area to patrol and monitor. But up in the Arctic, what would you think a credible deterrence presence would require?
As you say, sir, we love Alaska. It's beautiful up there. But some of the most challenging conditions that we operate in, for a number of reasons. The weather is one, but time, speed, distance is another one. And so, in answer to your question, I think we would need a couple things. We need cutters up there. Presence matters, especially when our adversaries are up there. Aircraft, ISR, the ability to do that. We need some land-based stations and those things. And so the ability to be there when we need to be there, which I would think is year-round, at least we're getting there. But at least when vessels are there and when our adversaries are there, to know what they're doing and then to do something about it.
And I appreciate you saying that. As we've discussed already this morning, the budget reconciliation bill that passed last year has a significant, historic, really, investments in Coast Guard, both in terms of new vessels and in programmatic funding. And hopefully we'll be able to get some of that deployed in Alaska on a permanent basis to help you and your mission for deterring IUU fishing activities off of Alaska's coast. At the end of the day, Alaska provides 60% of the nation's seafood catch, and we want to make sure that that our fishing families and those who rely on them are well protected, and they have a strong economic interest to continue to harvest that food off of Alaska's coast. So we appreciate your support in that mission. We love our Coast Guard, and we thank you for your service. And with that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields. Chair recognizes Mr. Garamundi for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think I want to go in a different direction here. I was reading, Mr. Lloyd, your document, and it raises in my mind the very serious issue of maintaining the various vessels that the Coast Guard has. noting the fall-off in availability that you so clearly put in your report, I want to move to the issue of where will these vessels be maintained? We've got a problem in California. The Mare Island facility is the oldest Navy base on the West Coast, and there are 4 dry docks there. Unfortunately, the Coast Guard made a decision to not bring the icebreaker Healy to Mare Island, even though it was the low bid by over $1 million. They used a process called best value to jimmy up some sort of expenses that put the Mare Island dry dock at a disadvantage. Now, there needs to be a serious discussion, some of which I've already done with the Commandant and with the Coast Guard, about just what is this best value game that is being played. Going forward, it isn't going to do us any good to go back and debate the Healy and whether it should or should not be at Mare Island. But Mare Island is a critical national asset for the Coast Guard as well as for the U.S. Navy. And I don't like the game that has been played, and I want to make sure that the Coast Guard is open and honest about future opportunities for Mare Island to successfully bid for Coast Guard work. Quality and price are the key issue here. So apparently, Mare Island Dry Dock Company had the low price except for this best value game. So going forward, I want to be sure that the Coast Guard understands the critical nature of work being brought to Mare Island. Oh, by the way, the Alameda station's about 10 miles away, and so there's a nexus there. I'm not asking you for this issue to be discussed today at this hearing, but I want to make it very clear that I do not like the way the Coast Guard has operated. There will be other bids and opportunities for Mare Island as well as other facilities on the West Coast. But the Coast Guard and the Navy must recognize that the Pacific is one very, very big ocean, and that the Coast Guard needs to make sure that all of the facilities available on the West Coast, whether it's San Diego or the Northwest or California in the San Francisco Bay Area, have an opportunity to bid. Now, with that, I want to go to one of the questions that has been on my mind forever, and that is the maintenance of the vessels. This does tie back to Mare Island and to other opportunities for maintenance programs. Ms. McLeod, in your evaluation of the decline of availability of Coast Guard vessels, did you spend time looking at the maintenance issues, how the maintenance programs operate or don't operate? Could you please discuss that?
Yes, we did in some ways, and we examined the issues around maintenance in terms of the workforce and obsolescence of parts, I would say, were 2 of our biggest areas that we found. Some of the cutters that are due for maintenance are being pushed to operate out in a surge operation due to the limited capacity of the assets, and workforce shortages. And secondly, in terms of parts obsolescence, some of these cutters can't operate because of malfunctioning parts, and then they are taking the part from a different cutter.
Excuse me for interrupting. Is there a system within the Coast Guard to identify all of those issues, cutter by cutter, class by class? And in other words, is there a maintenance reporting system set up so that the Coast Guard knows what the problems are and what they need, what they then can do to solve the problem?
We have a recommendation in that area. We found various systems, including, from the local level all the way up within the Coast Guard.
Could you please provide me with detailed information on your evaluation and the system or lack of systems that the Coast Guard has in its vessel class by vessel class? Thank you so very much. I yield back.
Gentleman yields. I recognize myself now for 5 minutes. I want to thank you all for being here today and providing us with this valuable information. Admiral, last fall during Operation Pacific Viper, the Coast Guard seized more than 150,000 pounds of cocaine in the eastern Pacific Ocean. This is more than 57 million potentially lethal doses. In November, Coast Guard cutter Stone broke the record for the most cocaine seized by a single cutter in a single patrol in Coast Guard history, offloading over 49,000 pounds of illicit narcotics worth $362 million. What do you give the credit to for these record-breaking numbers?
Chairman, good morning. Good to see you, sir. I think, this is a result of, one, that we put some capacity down there, and, as a result of the president declaring that national emergency on the southern border and with a focus on illicit drugs and fentanyl. The other one is that we've gotten quite good at this, and I think with what we've shown is that when we have the assets in place, an asset like the National Security Cutter that has an armed helicopter on the back of it, that has a law enforcement trained tactical team, the right small boats, communications, overhead satellites, ISR coordination with Giant of South and our partners, that we can really get after this problem set.
Good. What other law enforcement success has the Coast Guard seen specifically in the Arctic? In the Arctic,
we just talked with Mr. Begich about the importance of that area. I think, one example that comes to mind is last summer there were 5 Chinese research vessels that were operating on our extended continental shelf, and a combination of the Healy, the Weishi, and the newly commissioned Storis were able to challenge them under the rules-based order and then have them evacuate that area.
very good. Chinese vessels tend to be the largest offenders of IUU fishing. How does the United States Coast Guard confront these vessels given the aggressive Chinese Coast Guard? And what does the Coast Guard do to counter Chinese IUU fishing efforts?
We undertake a number of ways. One is the first and foremost is our presence out there. We have 11 cutters out there. We have 2 more fast response cutters that are making their way out to the Pacific. They're highly capable. We've also found that the Coast Guard is the right size to go to these small island nations, and familiarity with those folks, training them, bringing their shipwriters aboard, selling them equipment in some cases so that they can operate themselves, but equipping them so that when the Coast Guard is not there, that they can take action on those Chinese fishing fleets as they see fit in their own backyards.
Very good. Ms. McLeod, the GAO has completed its report examining the Coast Guard's ability to meet mission goals in drug and migrant interdictions. How migration surges impacts other missions and Coast Guard coordination with federal partners. Can you walk us through these findings?
Yes, in our report that was issued today, we provided a 10-year trends in drug and migrant interdiction along with other Coast Guard missions. I think how it bears out is, when the Coast Guard is focusing on one mission, it's taking away from the other missions. And so the balance of missions is a tricky position for the Coast Guard. When we found that they were not meeting their own performance metrics in the drug and migrant interdiction mission, that has to be looked at within the context of when they're shifting things to other missions. Without having the data to support where those metrics should be set, or the context, it's difficult to understand exactly how they're laying out their assets and workforce to meet the performance metrics that they've established.
Thank you. What are the biggest takeaways on how the Coast Guard can improve mission performance in these areas, Ms. McLeod?
Yeah, I think our information comes down to being able to measure your performance in these areas, and that comes from the data that underlies the information that the Coast Guard is examining.
Thank you. And I yield back to Ms. Gillen.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you to our witnesses for your service to our country and for appearing here today. So I am proud to represent the extraordinary men and women of Coast Guard Station Jones Beach in the 4th Congressional District of New York, where they conduct essential law enforcement missions along our South Shore and are a critical part of Coast Guard sector Long Island Sound. So Long Island is home to some of the busiest and most congested waterways in the country. And unfortunately, when boaters are unlicensed or they break the law, accidents can happen and tragedies happen. In 2005, 11-year-old Brianna Lineck was killed and her family was severely injured off the coast of Long Island when a boater without a license crashed into their vessel. According to 2023 Coast Guard data, 75% of boating deaths occur on vessels operated by individuals who have not received boating safety training or boaters who are unlicensed. I am a co-sponsor of bipartisan legislation named in Brianna's memory to require the Coast Guard to study and report to Congress on recreational vessel operator education and training. Rear Admiral, what are the steps that the Coast Guard is currently taking to reduce accidental boating deaths and to deter individuals from operating vessels without required licenses and trainings, and how can we in Congress help you serve that mission further and reduce deaths?
Congresswoman, good morning. And thank you for recognizing our men and women at Station Jones Beach and Sector Long Island Sound. Really, really beautiful part of the country. Part of the birthplace of the Coast Guard up there in the Northeast District. Very complex problem set. There's so many recreational boaters that are out there. We take a lot of steps working with not only our own Coast Guard Auxiliary volunteer force, but also all the boating law administrators at the local level to administer grant funds to educate as many boaters as possible. For us, that is life-saving work. We call that preventative SAR. If we can get somebody out there, if we can educate a boater, have the right equipment aboard the vessel, we think they have a chance to get home. If they know how to do a voyage plan, 9 times out of 10, we can go find them with the equipment that we have. And if we start adding in, personal locator beacons, we can put a helicopter right on top of your head. And that is our goal from the equipment standpoint. From the education standpoint, we work closely with the states, and obviously, we're a maritime country. People love their boats. To require licenses has always been a very, very complex question. But educating as many people as we can is a part of our mission.
Thank you, thank you. And just before last year, federal law limited the Coast Guard's ability to go after bad actors by requiring that drug smugglers be on board a vessel while the crime was committed. This hindered the Coast Guard's ability to go after operators of unmanned or autonomous vessels or criminals who stow drugs on ships without the knowledge of the crew. I was proud to join my Republican colleague, Congressman Addison McDowell, to co-lead and help pass bipartisan legislation into law last year to clarify that the focus should be on the location of the crime, regardless of the location of the criminal. The bill also requires the Coast Guard to make naloxone available on all Coast Guard installations, including Station Jones Beach. Again, Rear Admiral, this question is for you. Can you explain how these common sense changes will strengthen the Coast Guard's ability to go after bad actors, fight drug trafficking, and save lives?
Congresswoman, for us, any opportunity, any authority that allows us to continue to prosecute these cases is welcome and is useful to our effort. And from the standpoint of the drug smugglers themselves, to get after the transnational criminal organizations at their very heart, they, in many cases, some of the crew members aboard are the poorest. They are the least complicit part of the crime. And so I think, for us to put that in place so that we can go after the real masterminds of these crimes, and that'll give us an opportunity to really impact their revenue funds, their funds revenues, and as well as them putting them in jail at some point.
Thank you. I don't have much time, Ms. McLeod. I just wanted to ask you, thank you for your very thorough report. It seemed like a theme of it was that you need more staffing. You have a real shortfall. Would you be able, I'll put my question in the record, if you could just give us some advice on how Congress can support you to increase staffing levels and support the Coast Guard. I'd love to have that from you. Thank you. Thank you. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields. Chair recognizes Mr. Vandrew for his round of questions.
Thank you, Chairman. I love the title of this hearing, Drugs, Thugs, and Fish. Who would put that? If you weren't involved in the Coast Guard or it's one of these industries, you wouldn't know exactly how that all comes together. But it's good to see both of you again. Appreciate you being here. Just to go over a few things they've been touched on. We know the Coast Guard does what nobody else can do, enforces the law at sea, defends our maritime border, defends our legitimate commerce, defends the fishing industry. People don't realize very often that are not involved in this process how important that piece of it is too. We've had a record number of drug interdictions, as you know, and the Coast Guard is being asked to do more than any ever was asked in this area. And by the way, I wanted to emphasize it was important. I heard some other members mention some concerns they had. Once the drugs are in our children's bodies, we've already lost. We've got a problem. Forgetting the financial aspect of what it does to America, the billions upon billions of dollars in treatment, in social work, in medical care, in lost hours of work, in a job, of destroying people's lives. So it is up to us to ensure that before that gets into America, that we stop it, whether it's on land, whether it's on sea, whether it's drug cartels, whether it's corrupt politicians. I applaud what's happening when we're working hard to prevent this from coming over. I do not see how anybody can ever defend drug cartels or those that would poison, especially the young people of this great nation. So the work that you do in that area is important. All of it's important. It's all important, but that's particularly at this time. It's good to see you all again, like I said. There are some asset gaps still, and we're doing better, and record amounts of money are coming into the Coast Guard, and that's good. Finally, for God's sake, finally, how many years we've been in this very committee room talking about this. What could we do, if anything, to even increase success in drug interdiction? Is there some areas that you think we're still not addressing as well as we could? You're both free to answer that question. Rear Admiral, why don't we start with you?
Congressman, for us, I think it comes down to the assets and the people, and I think the Big Beautiful Bill is a great start to that. The Coast Guard's got to come through on our obligation to deliver these, to deliver these assets and to build out the shore infrastructure like Cape May so that we can bring more recruits through and man these. And
if I could just jump in for a second, because I've always got to say this, what is it, 85% of all the recruits are trained in Cape May, New Jersey. Happens to be in my district, and we're going to do amazing things there, as you know. Thank you.
We may have to recalculate the number based on the number of people we're moving through there right now, Congressman. So,
okay.
But I think that's one of the other thing I would say is, for us, the Big Beautiful Bill is a start. There's a lot of acquisitions money that's in there. There is some depot level maintenance. To avoid going into the same cycle that Ms. McLeod helps us highlight of maintenance, we need a lift in our annual budget in order to pay for the personnel, the sustainment, the maintenance, and the re-equipping as software goes obsolete, as parts go obsolete. We need that continued support from the Congress as well.
So Chairman, that's something we might keep in mind and work all of us together on that issue. And we always hear all these terrible things about the Big Beautiful Bill. I don't agree, and I'm trying not to be partisan here. Record amounts of money going into the Coast Guard and many other areas as well, including our airports, FAA, et cetera. So I think that there's a lot of good there as well. When you say real quickly, you might need to recalculate with the numbers going through as far as training, could you just give me a brief snapshot?
So last year, we put about 5,600 people through, when our annual throughput is normally about 4,200, and we had been historically low the last several years before that. So, as we build out Cape May, we put new gyms, new barracks, and more things.
Again, let me thank you so much. Chairman, just so we know, under this administration, the work that we've all done, where we had, basically folks were demoralized. They weren't, joining. And now we have people coming back to the Coast Guard and our military branches, proud to be part of it and joining up. And there's record numbers of increases all across the board, including in the Coast Guard. And that's why I wanted you to just articulate that. And finally, and then I know I have to stop, I have no time left, the CVC policy letter, how it impacts our fishing industry, please do not forget about that. I'm like a dog on a bone. It matters to our fishermen.
Congressman, we'll give you an update on that. I think we have some good news for you.
Good, I appreciate that. Will you contact my office?
Absolutely.
Thank you. I reel back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields. Chair recognizes Ms. Shelton. 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Chair Ezell and Ranking Member Gillen, Carvajal, and welcome to our witnesses. The Coast Guard serves as an integral role in enforcing maritime law, including detecting and intercepting illicit activities and substances. Notably, I would like to commend the Coast Guard for recently intercepting a Russian vessel linked to Hezbollah's illicit financing network. This is exactly the kind of top-notch work we expect from our fearless coasties, and you made us proud in that mission. It's no surprise that I think the Coast Guard is the best at what it does. Just last year, the service broke its drug interdiction record, seizing over 500,000 pounds of narcotics. Simply put, the Coast Guard carries out its law enforcement duties well and intercepts these harmful drugs better than any other entity. While fulfilling this mission, the Coast Guard also takes the suspected drug smugglers into custody. Typically, the federal prosecutors at the Department of Justice then leverage these cases to dig up intelligence about the larger drug operation, ultimately limiting the flow of drugs into our community. As a former DOJ attorney myself, I'm deeply concerned about the fact that Attorney General Bondi has directed prosecutors to stop bringing charges against low-level offenders. Now we're seeing individuals captured by the Coast Guard being repatriated. Rear Admiral Barada, can you speak to how important these federal investigations are for information gathering? Additionally, please touch on how does the Coast Guard approach taking suspected smugglers into custody, their approach to doing that, how does that better serve our national security interests rather than killing the traffickers in the water, as we have unfortunately seen the Department of Defense do?
Congresswoman, so the counter-drug mission, that part of it, once we're doing the prosecution, we follow that normal process, through the maritime operational, the motor process, the threat response.
Yeah.
We go back to the Department of Justice, and in some cases, if their policy changes as it has recently, there is still intrinsic value in us, getting these drugs off the street, as has been highlighted here, and then conducting those interviews with them, going through the materials that they have available to them, the cell phones that they have aboard, and using that to help disrupt the flow of drugs as they come in. We also take biometrics off the smugglers, and so whether or not they are put back into the system or they're prosecuted, those drugs are not making their way to the street. As far as there is a deterrent effect to some of the kinetic strikes that are going on in some of the drug smugglers that we've seen. Whether that's going to be short-term or long-term remains to be seen.
But the kinetic strikes, the killings, let's be clear here. You're not collecting biometrics from those individuals or getting additional detailed information about their plans as you would when you're arresting other individuals.
We are not.
My next question, while drug and migrant interdiction are clearly critical parts of the Coast Guard's mission, I also want to ensure that Congress's unprecedented investment in the services also supports its other functionalities. Back home in Muskegon and Grand Haven, also known as Coast Guard City, USA, the Coast Guard search and rescue operations are always top of mind for families who come to enjoy the beach, or even when they're not supposed to, climb Lake Michigan's beautiful ice formations. Rear Admiral Barada, with a reinvigorated push towards its law enforcement efforts, how will the Coast Guard ensure there isn't disinvestment in other mission-critical areas, particularly as the service is about 8% short of enlisted personnel needs right now? Additionally, can you assure that stations like those in my district will not be closed with the current administration's emphasis on drug seizures?
Congresswoman, good news on the recruiting front. I think our ranks are continuing to swell as we bring people through Cape May. So I think that's for us. How we restaff some of the stations that we had to destaff. We're making decisions on that right now. But obviously, the Great Lakes, our life-saving mission will not go away. The Commandant has been very clear that that's our touchstone, that's our North Star, and we are committed to that mission and to the people of the Great Lakes.
And our stations in Grand Haven and Muskegon are safe?
Yes, absolutely.
Fantastic. Okay, West Michiganders and citizens. Oh, I recognize I'm running out of time. We are having too much fun here. So, thank you. Okay, great. I will get to my last question. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. West Michiganders and citizens across the nation rely on federal agents and service members to thoughtfully and carefully fulfill their law enforcement duties, a responsibility I know Coasties do not take lightly. I wonder, last week we watched in horror as Renee Good, a mother of a U.S. citizen who was shot and killed by an ICE agent. A thorough federal investigation is absolutely necessary to provide Renee Good's 3 children and her community with the answers that they need as they grieve this tragedy. Rear Admiral Barada, while I'd never ask you to speak on behalf of another federal agency, can you please reassure American citizens that the Coast Guard has a clear use of force policy? We know that oftentimes the Coast Guard is called in to situations such as this as well. And further, can you please touch on how the Coast Guard trains its service members to best protect themselves and civilians while carrying out law enforcement activities?
Congresswoman, thanks for the opportunity to kind of highlight how some of our law enforcement specialists, and I think what we saw over the last month or so on some of these Venezuelan tankers where we've had some of our high-end operators going aboard, and we've also seen our tactical law enforcement teams, but all the way down to our maritime law enforcement specialists around the country. They are trained in a standardized way. They are trained in our use of force policy. And, for us, we're very proud of the work that they do and our interactions with the public.
Thank you. Thank you for the extra time, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields. Admiral and Ms. McLeod, I want to thank you for being here today. Admiral, I want to encourage you to use the appropriated funds that have been given to the Coast Guard. And the next time I see you, I'm going to ask you. So make sure that you go after that money. And one other thing I'd like to say is I was very much responsible for the getting rid of the low bid. And I would encourage the Coast Guard to continue to use the best opportunities for all their work getting done, because so many times we've seen over the years low bid is not the best bid. So continue to get the best job done so we can have the best ships and everything fixed in a timely manner.
Yes, Chairman, and we look forward to seeing you at the commissioning of the Olivia Hooker later this month.
Yes, sir. I want to thank you all again for being here today. Are there any further questions by any other members? You sure, Ms. Shelton? Okay. Seeing none, that concludes our hearing today. I'd like to thank each one of our witnesses for your testimony, and this subcommittee stands adjourned.